My name is Shamira Madhany. I am the Managing Director and Deputy Executive Director of World Education Services. Hoping that everybody here knows about WES. We assess academic credentials for about 500,000 individuals per year. Thank you for joining us, and I'm very honored to moderate the session of expert thought leaders. And before we dig in, I'd like to set some context building on what Minister Miller said this morning. As we know, it has been extremely eventful for the last week or so for IRCC with the release of the various reports. The government has put out several major recommendations, including the 2024-26 Immigration Levels Plan. And you heard the minister talk about stabilizing the number of permanent residents admitted into Canada. And I'm just going to read in terms of what Minister Miller has talked about. This plan recognizes the critical nature of immigration in supporting economic growth while balancing pressures in areas such as housing, healthcare, and infrastructure. The response to these pressures, especially recent polling around immigration, will be discussed shortly by my colleague Keith. I'll introduce him. And some of the questions that we need to consider this morning are really basically at the macro and micro level. So the first question is, how do we ensure that newcomers are able to contribute fully to our workplaces and our communities, and that they can build a future here and see themselves as part of Canada's future versus I'm temporary, am I going to stay? The second question is, how can we provide innovative approaches? Because we can keep on criticizing as to how we could do better, but what we need to consider is that we have a number of competing jurisdictions that are struggling with demographic issues, as we have basically an aging population, one young person coming in to two retiring in the next 3 years, which will double very soon. By 2060, it might feel like as it's far away, but it's around the corner. So how do we make sure that the work that we do, and all of us here today, are thinking about innovation in a very different way? So I now have the privilege of introducing my colleagues. Dr. Newman, who served as the inaugural Executive Director of Environics Institute from November 2011 to May 2019. He's now a senior associate at the Institute. Next is Christine Binet from IRCC. She's been working with IRCC since 2020, starting as Director of Cross-Border Migration and Asylum Policy. She's currently the Senior Director of Settlement and Integration Policy. Don't ask her any hard questions. You ask the minister all the hard questions. Next to her is Vicky Sinclair, who joined MANSA, the Manitoba Association of Newcomer Services Organization, as its first executive director in June 2016. MANSA acts as an umbrella organization for settlement service providers in Manitoba, and she represents 62 member agencies on Immigration Partner Winnipeg Council. And next to her is Neelam Sehota. Neelam is the Chief Executive Officer of Diversity, which provides multilingual programs and services in settlement, language, employment, and community engagement. And Neelam joined Diversity in 2013. What the speakers will do is I'll start with the macro approach, basically polling and then policy. We'll then move into how we're working in collaboration, and then Neelam will talk about issues on the ground. We'll then open it up to Q&A. So Keith, I invite you to the podium.
So there should be a presentation deck. If whoever's managing it can bring my presentation deck up. Thank you, Shamira, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to be at this important gathering. Excuse me. All right, half of it's there. All right, there we are. I want to speak about immigration this morning from the perspective of Canadians as a whole, all 40 million of us, give or take. That, of course, includes all of you, but I really want to expand the discussion beyond this room to everybody that lives in this land. See if this works. My perspective is looking at immigration as a social researcher. Our institute has been doing public interest social research for a number of years. And among other things, that includes a Focus Canada research program where we have been tracking issues like immigration, in this case since the 1970s. I've been at this conference before on this podium in 2019 and 2021 talking about our research, and now I'm back to talk about the latest research which we released about 3 weeks ago, which some of you may have seen. So I want to start with this slide because this is a slide that I presented at this conference 2 years ago. And basically to make the point that Canada, for the most part, has been successful as an immigrant nation. Everybody has never been on the same page, but we have what I would call a critical social or political consensus that accepts immigration and our diversity in a broad sense. And even the pandemic and contentious politics have not detracted or taken us away from this particular general sentiment. And I think we're pretty fortunate among nations, certainly Western nations, in terms of how immigration has been playing out. Excuse me. Just to give you some sense globally from the Gallup World Poll 2019, I showed this slide again 2 years ago, among 140 countries, among publics in these countries, Canada is at the top of the list in terms of its public, generally speaking, accepting migrants. And if we look at it from the other perspective, if the next, there we go, from the perspective of prospective migrants, also from Gallup Worldwide, what are the top destinations that people who are considering migration might want to go to? Canada's number 2 on the list, but a close second to the US, which is always, I guess, a perennial favorite. And that gap has actually narrowed. So that's the picture from 2021, I think a fairly positive one. As we all know, however, 2023 has been a rather difficult year in this country and elsewhere, obviously. The facts and events, I don't need to go into those. I think we're all aware of all the challenges that we're facing these days. What I want to address is how is this being reflected in public opinion? And I want to cover briefly the results of our latest survey, our Focus Canada survey conducted in September, in this case in partnership with Century Initiative. A very global question is, how do you think the country's doing today? Are you satisfied or dissatisfied with the way things are going? And we could see from this chart that Canadians are unusually negative, dissatisfied, much more so than a year ago, and in fact, more so than since we started asking this question in 2016. So there is sort of a negative sentiment generally about the country. A lot of it's about economics, not surprisingly, with inflation and cost of living and so forth. This is a very busy slide, but basically what it shows is that if you look over to the right, increasing numbers of Canadians are saying the economy is getting worse, and very few say it's getting better. And the reason I'm showing you, thank you, the historical pattern is that we're approaching that territory where consumer confidence in the economy is as low as it's been in the last 40 years in various times. So clearly economic issues are taking place, but it's more than just the economy. We are in a housing crisis, I think, growing scarce and affordability, especially for young people. The healthcare system continues to be under stress. We're dealing with a climate emergency, which is having on-the-ground impacts with wildfires and flooding. And of course, there's geopolitical conflict, which is now being imported here. So there is a lot going on. One of the consequences of all of these things is that Canadians have a less confidence in their governments. Not at any particular level, but generally speaking. Confidence in government's ability to prepare for the future is less than it was during the pandemic. And I think it's just a challenging time to be in the public service these days. And of course, everybody in this room is familiar with the immigration story. population surpassing 40 million, increased by more than 1 million in the past year, high growth rates, and of course, this is all part of the plan in terms of maintaining our population growth and in terms of filling labor market needs. This is sort of what we should be doing. However, all of these different factors are coming together in a particular combination that is something new to Canada, and something clearly has changed. This is the result of a question that we've been asking on our survey since 1977. And it's basically, do you agree or disagree that overall there's too much immigration to Canada? If you look at the trend line, you can see in the 80s and 90s, most Canadians agreed there was too much immigration. It then changed dramatically, and over the past 20 years, most Canadians have disagreed. But what have we seen over the last 12 months? We've seen a sharp shift. Many more people than before are agreeing there's too much immigration, and fewer people are saying disagreeing. This is quite a significant shift in public opinion in 1 year. It's not something that we see very often. I think we missed one. All right, we missed the slide, but that's fine. This is an issue that's becoming increasingly polarized over the last few years, and we can see that polarization in terms of federal political affiliation has increased. But even among supporters of the Liberals and NDPs federally, they are increasingly seeing that there's too much immigration. I think the slide that got missed, nope, that's the next slide coming, excuse me. Why are people saying there's too much immigration? We asked an open-ended question. Those people that said too much, what's the reason? And first and foremost, it's around housing. Concerns, sort of conclusion or questions or concerns that newcomers may be driving up house prices or taking housing away from others. That category, that theme has doubled over the past year. That is really the most salient aspect of people's concern about immigration levels. Of course, there are other kinds of concerns that you can see on this slide. I will note that the number of people who talk about immigrants as a threat to culture and identity has dropped. So there is some good news there. And I think on that point, what's really important to emphasize is not everything has changed. Concerns about immigration levels have gone up, but attitudes and opinions about immigrants themselves have not. Most Canadians continue to agree that immigration is good for the economy. We could see that there has been a bit of a dip in the past year, but 3/4 of Canadians continue to say immigration is good for the economy. What about opinions about integration, about the kinds of people, immigrants that are coming to this country and in your community or certain types? This has always been the most contentious aspect of immigration for many Canadians. What we see, however, in the last couple of years is opinions are divided, but they remain largely stable. What about Quebec? It's often, I think, assumed, particularly outside of Quebec perhaps, that Quebecers are the most resistant to immigrants from different cultures and places. What we're seeing here over a 30-year period is, in fact, Quebecers are becoming less concerned about threats to their identity and culture, which I think perhaps is counterintuitive. What about at the local level? We asked a new question this year. Thinking about where you live in your community, do you think immigration overall makes your community a better place or a worse place? And we can see here from the slide that 42% say better, only 9% say worse. So clearly, despite the concerns that people might have about immigration levels, when we ask about people's own community, the results are not quite the same. So let me wrap up. Have I got time? Yes? All right. Excuse me. Let me just wrap up. The main conclusions is that we see a dramatic shift in public opinion, specifically with respect to the volume of immigration, the numbers of people that Canadians think are coming, whether they know the million figure or not. And it's driven primarily what's happening in their own communities, housing, but also other aspects of their community and infrastructure and services and so forth. There's a lot happening that are making people a little more challenged where they live and in their own lives, and people are thinking about a large number of immigrants coming in. And I think it's important to point out that this sentiment, this shift in sentiment, is happening across the country. It's not limited to particular regions or cities or demographic subgroups, some more, some less, but this is a sentiment that's shifted largely across the board. And importantly, we have seen no comparable change over the past year in how Canadians view who's coming and where they're coming from. So, one final slide. What should we take from this? Well, the policies, the settlement issues that all of you are dealing with aren't that different this year from last year. Perhaps a little more challenging, and there's some shifting here or there. But the broad public narrative has changed significantly over the past 12 months. And Canadians as a whole are now focusing more on how many newcomers are coming and much less about who they are and where they're coming for. So I would characterize this as capacity versus character. And I think this is a very important distinction for us all to recognize and to realize that when you start hearing people talk about maybe there's too much immigration today, they may not be anti-immigrant, they may not be xenophobic, they might be, but they aren't necessarily, because this is really something new in the Canadian public mind, if you will, that there's now a distinction between numbers and the types of people who are coming. And I think it's something we need to consider as we move forward with our policy and our communications. Where things go from here, it's difficult to predict the future. It's difficult to know where the economy is going to go, where issues around climate change or geopolitical conflict or whatever. So this could change, and we could see a different picture of public opinion a year from now, and we'll continue to do our research and keep you informed. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Keith. I will now invite Christine. And by the way, I saw people taking pictures of the amazing slides. The full report is out, and it's a very interesting report, so take a read at it. So Christine, over to you.
Bonjour. Hello. Very happy to be here with you today. Thanks for having me. First slide, please. As we just heard, public opinion on immigration is shifting in the current context of rising levels of immigration and in response to concerns over absorptive capacity. The successful settlement and integration of newcomers is an essential element in addressing these concerns, and it's the focus of my work at IRCC for the settlement and resettlement assistance programs. First slide, please. Ma présentation décrira comment ces programmes se sont adaptés.
This presentation will describe how programs have adapted to levels of immigration and how we want to adapt the program further in the context of the Resettlement Assistance Program, the 2024 call for proposals.
Slide 3, please.
Just let me know when. Okay, I'll do it. Is that okay?
Sorry, we're just trying to get the right slide.
Here, do you want to do that?
Okay, I'll do it. Thanks. So consistent with what you heard from Keith, the Canadian population grew by over 1 million people in 2022, 2023. And this came on the heels of historic growth in 2021 and was driven by immigration, which accounted for over 95% of the growth in those years. As the findings Keith presented and illustrated, it is important to take a broad view when determining immigration levels. This is why the most recent levels plan stabilizes projected admissions to allow for coordinated and sustainable population growth, and in recognition of public and stakeholder concerns related to housing, infrastructure planning, and Canada's ability to absorb increases in the number of newcomers. So the increases in immigration levels observed in the last few years are a reflection of increased global instability that is leading to growing immigration flows and humanitarian needs around the world. And we heard the minister speak about this morning. Over the past 5 decades, we've seen an increase in the estimated number of international migrants. We've also seen an increase in the number of protected persons and refugees Canada has welcomed, including from the global crisis, different global crises in Afghanistan and supporting Ukrainians fleeing the war. And many of these individuals continue to have very complex needs that need to be addressed in order to successfully settle and integrate into Canada. The combination of recent level increases as well as influxes of humanitarian populations has stretched not only the capacity of the settlement and resettlement assistance providers, but also impacted other social services and infrastructure necessary for successful settlement and integration, such as in housing, as we've heard. Here we can see that the number of net new households formed in 2022 was well above the net housing units built. While we know that permanent and temporary migration contributed to this imbalance, we also know that immigration adds new workers that we need to grow the economy and to address labor shortages in key sectors, including construction. While high volumes of newcomers are an important consideration, it doesn't tell the whole story. Changing immigration patterns are impacting what services are needed, when, and where. Temporary and permanent immigration are increasingly interlinked, as a significant portion of annual admissions reflect a change in status from TR to PR, rather than a change in geographic location, impacting the types of supports needed for newcomers to settle and integrate. The location where newcomers choose to settle is also another important factor, as PRs are more concentrated in metropolitan areas than Canadian residents, suggesting that more support may be needed to attract and retain newcomers in small, rural, and remote communities. So, as everyone in the room knows, Canada has a long-standing reputation as a world leader in settlement and integration in Canada. And that is delivered by the federal program, but delivered by the over 550 settlement service providers across Canada. And this is the cornerstone of our success. The number of settlement clients has increased steadily over the last few years, with COVID-related closures briefly dropping those levels, but then volumes peaked at 608,000 settlement clients in 2022-23. And refugees are becoming a larger share of settlement clients, while economic immigrants are becoming a smaller share, even as the share of the arrivals of these categories has not shown the same pattern. But the program has responded well to these volumes and changes. It has had to innovate, for sure. During the pandemic, services were quickly provided online, with close to 90% of all clients receiving at least one service through an online or hybrid format. And other innovations to address the changing mix and the changing needs were tested through the Service Delivery Improvement Fund, or our Innovation Fund. Ensuring
the vitality of Francophone communities is a priority for IRCC. Now, more than ever, progress has been realized in consolidating an integrative Francophone pathway, which offers French services for resettlement outside of Quebec. Francophone communities that are minority communities have been able to attract and integrate people thanks to increased funding and agencies offering services.
So I've just presented some trends and outcomes in immigration and the settlement of newcomers. Tracking outcomes and understanding what works and what doesn't is a key component of our work that enables us to continue to evolve the program in a way that is reflective of our changing base and increased volumes. We've made great strides building a solid knowledge base of what works and what doesn't, and rolling successes into the program. By leveraging a number of data sources to understand outcomes and contextual factors, we're able to communicate a full story of the program, and organizations play a key role in providing this data by inputting into our database and by providing annual reports on their projects. And then we build these on these data sources, and we look at our newcomer outcomes survey, which we started doing in 2018, and we look at other immigration data sets and other client outcomes, and we bring this all together to form a picture. Based on our annual survey of newcomers, we know that settlement services are largely meeting clients' immediate settlement needs and are helping them in their settlement journey. Crucially, we know that the majority of clients of the settlement program directly participate in the Canadian labor market, with close to 75% indicating that they're working. Of those, 79% are working full-time. And as a point of comparison, the employment rate in 2021 was 81% among immigrants and 84% among Canadian-born. The fact that many of our clients are refugees with high needs explains at least part of this differential. Further, among clients who indicated they're not working, close to half said they're looking for work or about to start work. And importantly, we know that not all clients are able to work, but that these individuals are contributing in other ways, other important ways, such as taking care of children or studying. We also know that clients report feeling a greater sense of belonging to their communities than those that don't use settlement services, that the vast majority have confidence in Canadian public institutions, and that they engage in community activities. So although overall settlement services are meeting clients' needs, we know that there are opportunities to continue to evolve the program to ensure settlement offerings remain relevant and at pace with emerging trends. So to this end, on November 14th, IRCC did launch the next call for proposal for the next 5-year funding cycle for the settlement and resettlement assistance programs. Ultimately, CFP 2024 aims to balance service continuity and stability for both clients and funded organizations for services that we know are working well, with opportunities to make strategic changes in priority areas that are informed by various lines of evidence. So one priority area is increasing national consistency. Newcomers should expect the same level of service no matter where they are in the country. That is our goal. We will look to sustain collaboration by encouraging partnerships between various players, between service provider organizations, different levels of government, Indigenous organizations, private institutions. We've also been co-planning with our province and territorial partners and others to avoid duplication and take stock of best practices and innovations that create efficiency. And we'll seek to remove the barriers that continue to exist around accessing settlement services, particularly in rural and small centers. We anticipate that increased use of digital will expand the visibility and coverage of services across Canada. However, we heard very clearly through our consultations last year that there are specific considerations that need to be taken into account for those operating in rural and remote communities and small centers, given the lack of infrastructure and digital tools, which can actually act as a barrier to benefiting from digital delivery. So earlier I spoke, and we've heard about the increase in the number of refugees Canada has welcomed. So the Resettlement Assistance Program is therefore an important component in CFP 2024. We know that early and timely interventions are important in supporting successful client outcomes. So this program will solicit proposals for projects that offer port of entry services to ensure that clients have timely and effective supports from the moment they enter Canada to the first 4 to 6 weeks upon arrival. CFP 24 is also an opportunity to consider whether we have the right mix of communities in which we fund the delivery of these services, and we will be expanding the number of communities. In doing so, we'll facilitate the distribution of government-assisted refugees across Canada and hopefully help a bit with, to offset some of the housing pressures in the big centres. Afin de faire progresser encore davantage les priorités clés, l'appel de proposition 2024 sollicitera des demandes dans le cadre de 3 volets de financement
We'll be looking
spécifiques.
at 3 specific funding
Spécialisés nous donnent un outil pour inviter et
This will
financer
give us a
des
tool
propositions qui
to
comprennent
finance
des plans pour répondre
propositions
aux besoins
that
de
have
diverses
plans
clientèles.
for
Le volet parcours d'intégration des
diverse
francophones
needs.
aidera le gouvernement à atteindre
The Francophone
objectifs
integration
ambitieux en
pathway,
matière d'immigration francophone. Le volet équité
The
fera
equity
progresser les
stream
engagements du ministère en
will support
matière
not
d'équité,
currently
de
funded
diversité et
grassroots
d'inclusion.
organization,
Et le volet amélioration de la
and the
prestation de
service
services
delivery
permettra
improvement
d'accroître l'innovation
will
dans
be
la
able
prestation
to
des
look at
services dans le
innovation
cadre de notre programme de
in
base.
services.
So in closing, IRCC is at an important phase in our work. Driven by changing immigration landscape, informed by our rich data and evidence, and guided by the findings of the Strategic Immigration Review, we know that the provision of settlement services to newcomers is key to their retention, and that the successful integration of newcomers affects public support for immigration. So as we look ahead to the next 5 years of funding for the settlement program, we will continue to make informed, evidence-based decisions that facilitate program continuity while we advance on our commitments to provide the right services to the right clients at the right time. So thank you very much for your time and attention today. If you'd like to learn more about the settlement and resettlement assistance programs and the call for proposal, there's some information on the slide here, including our cool new QR code that you can put your phone up to and go straight to the page. Thanks.
Thank you, Christine. Once again, I noticed that everybody's taking lots of pictures because this is the core of our business, correct? So it's going to be really interesting in terms of questions that we throw at Christine, and she will be available after the Q&A session. So, Vicky, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel today. And I got to sit next to the minister, so that was exciting. And if anyone took a photo of him with me in, can you send it to me? Because I was too shy to ask for a selfie, and I know my team will be like, we need it for the annual report. So, thank you. I'll be speaking today. Oh, is my presentation? Yes. I will be speaking today wearing both my National Policy Committee co-chair hat and my provincial umbrella hat, but mainly my Manitoba one, which is probably a very warm toque. All my examples are from Manitoba, as those are the photos that I have, and after one quick ask, I received 5 times more than I can fit in today, so sorry if the examples you sent me are not here. But similar inspiring examples are happening at umbrellas and lips and SPOs and in community in every province and territory. Je vais parler en anglais.
I will speak English and speak slower than usual to help the interpreters. I know my title in French is not good French, but it's a little play on words in English, so I took the liberty.
I'm going to give you a sector feedback sandwich, which is a favorite of nonprofit managers. First, some of the amazing changes increased immigration has brought to Manitoba and how Manso supports a welcoming community. And then a little about the very real challenges agencies across the country are facing as they struggle to leave the pandemic behind, to keep ahead of the innovation curve, and to do more with less on a daily basis. I will then cheer us all up again with some inspiring best practices by direct and indirect service providers, working in partnership with the community and the newcomers themselves to provide that welcome to all to friendly Manitoba. Manitoba welcomed almost 22,000 new permanent residents in 2022, with 72% destined to Winnipeg. In the first 9 months of this year, we've already welcomed about 20,000 permanent residents. I know compared to Ontario, Alberta, these are not huge numbers, but per capita, when you add in the over 20,000 displaced Ukrainians, increasing numbers of secondary migration, especially among refugee claimants, and over 22,000 study permit holders last year alone, plus equal numbers of TFWs, you can see that it's not your grandma's Manitoba anymore, unless your grandma is an immigrant living in Manitoba, which in this sector she may well be. Between the 2016 and 2021 census, Manitoba grew by 5.4% and Winnipeg by 7.6%, all due to immigration. 19.7% of Manitobans are now immigrants, compared to just 12.1% in 2001. The national percentage for Canada is 23%, but Winnipeg comes in at 25.4%. The top countries of origin are the Philippines, by far the largest, followed by India, and then a large drop-off to UK, China, and Germany. Oh, no, wrong way. 58.9% of recent immigrants to Manitoba have a bachelor's degree or higher, and well over a third had temporary status first. So not everyone is requiring the settlement and language services that our sector provide, but they will still definitely face barriers to community integration, and especially with credential recognition. Meanwhile, the Manitoba government is desperately trying to hire essential workers of all kinds and is strongly investing in overseas recruitment, from nurses in the Philippines to French teachers in Morocco. So I just love seeing faces of people out and about since the pandemic. So most of my slides today are just photos, but you can always contact me for any information about any of the projects. This is Jinky and Sunny Puash with their daughter Alexandra. They're taking part in the entirely volunteer-led SHIFT program through Scotiabank's Grow the Game initiative. This is Don Body, our small centre support manager. He is also a basketball referee, and a parent took this photo of him with young scorekeepers in a small town, Gladstone, Manitoba. We also have other Manso staff spending their evenings teaching newcomers to speak French and to learn to drive a car. And I hope this says more about the desire of all of us who worked in direct services to carry on working with clients rather than the actual need for a second job. Here's Manso. We were formed in 2016, and we were an amalgamation of the existing settlement and language umbrellas in Manitoba. We now have 75 plus member agencies working in English and en français across the province, including almost every ISCC funded agency in the province, with new full and friend membership requests every month. These are Swiss workers meeting for professional development and networking on a beautiful sunny day. Some in-school services were stopped for almost 2 full school years due to restrictions, with Swiss workers meeting with participants outside or online. This is in Edmonton in February, where 400 plus ASA, SAISA, that's the Alberta and Saskatchewan umbrellas, and Manso members all met together for a 3-day summit, first time since the pandemic, and this is the Manitoba group. These are small centre link coordinators. This one are Winnipeg link language coordinators sharing resources. As everyone knows, it has been a huge learning curve for virtual classes for teachers and students. Some large agencies, such as Red River Polytechnic, have had the resources to provide separate digital onboarding courses for students, which have saved hours of class time. And these are small centre link coordinators who have also requested regular in-person meetings, which always take place outside of Winnipeg around the province. Unfortunately, we mostly meet like this. We've held several prairie-wide summits online, allowing more staff from each agency to participate. There's an excellent report that was released this month, led by Dr. Ray Silvius, with contributions from all 3 prairie umbrellas, about the effects of the pandemic, specifically on small centre service providers in the prairies. And one frontline staff was quoted saying that being able to collaborate and network with service providers, partners, community stakeholders, Indigenous groups, and co-workers across regions via technology was a benefit that should be kept in the post-pandemic world, although I'm not sure we've reached that yet. This is Chief Donnie Smoke presenting a panel at last year's Manso's Rural Gathering in Brandon. This year's Rural Gathering is being hosted on reserve land near Portage La Prairie and will include a visit to a residential school. We've also collaborated with sector and Indigenous groups on the development of Land and Treaty EAL curriculum for all CLB levels. And again, there are agencies and LIPs across Manitoba and across the country doing this work. It's easy to get bogged down in some of the day-to-day stresses, but there are so many amazing projects going on, and now when we get together, we really say, tell us something good, tell us something you're proud of. And something I'm proud of, this is Manso's Associate Executive Director, Saeed Umar, and Manso Board President Nina, who I can see just over here, Kondo, presenting Manso's anti-racism framework developed by BIPOC members in response to a resolution voted on unanimously at our AGM. We have champion and active learner member agencies rotating each year who are working on the 9 calls to action for meaningful, authentic, and honest engagement and building understanding and awareness around what systemic racism is, how it operates within member agencies, organizations, the sector, and larger society. This is an anti-racism sport campaign. Here are the many partners. It's led by Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, and again, I think Ruben is in the room and will be here for the LIP conference. Many of you know them. They are leaders nationally in anti-racism and reconciliation work, and we partner with them on many projects. Activities in the campaign include school presentations, stakeholder training, and a public awareness campaign. There's also lots of good anti-racism work happening in smaller centres, including BU Care's Research Centre at Brandon University, who've developed really powerful videos and facilitators guide as part of the Real Change campaign, which you can find on their website. This is Tracy, who's also here in the room, who works for Manitoba Possible, works with newcomers with disabilities. She was excited to get some of the 4,500 free zoo tickets worth over $90,000 in the last 18 months that we've been able to hand out to our members. Again, by having an umbrella, we can take on some of that logistics work, some of the organization work. So not every agency has to work with the zoo. We can get them, and then we can fairly distribute them. And we ask for more every year. And here, Emily, second from the right, Halderson is our Ukraine coordinator, and she's on a site visit to Gimli, Manitoba, where there's a big Ukrainian population. She's been working closely with Manitoba's Ukrainian community, our member agencies, and all levels of government. And as part of the USH, National Corporate Donations, over $28,000 in gift cards were given to SPOS to give to Ukrainians and other displaced persons last year, and that continues this year. This is at the Newcomer Welcome Fair. Justine Trin on the left is our communications and member outreach guru. Over 1,500 newcomers came to the Welcome Fair in 2023. It's an annual event organized again by IPW and many partner agencies with free food and cultural performances, games, and we help arrange all the service provider resource tables every year. This is part of the City of Winnipeg and multi-agency partnership. 2,400 free one-year recreation access passes worth more than $785,000 have been handed out to displaced Ukrainians and recently arrived refugees. And again, that's continuing this year. Just the sector working together with all levels of government to make sure that we're a welcoming community and it doesn't all fall on one funder or one set of community to support newcomers. Here, we've got partners including the Winnipeg Indigenous Executive Circle, Volunteer Manitoba, and Creative Manitoba. We're jointly advocating on behalf of nonprofits with the now Minister of Finance, Adrian Sala, who's on the right there. Again, trying not to get stuck in silos. Everybody is facing housing issues. Everybody is facing, anti-poverty issues, and we're working together with all sectors so that we're not competing. We've worked with mainstream and Indigenous affordable housing groups and shelters and consistently met with Manitoba Health to remove barriers to accessing health cards. This is with the Deputy Head of Mission from the Japanese Embassy to talk about recruitment and retention in small centres, and we're getting a lot of international interest from media on that. This is with Minister John Reyes and the Honourable Lloyd Axworthy. I was on the Immigration Advisory Council, and this is the recommendations. I think they got quite bored of my repetitive advocacy on behalf of the sector, but they let me be at the launch anyway. Here's Katie and me photobombing our illustrious colleagues at last month's National Sector Engagement meetings in Ottawa. I could not do the important work as a National Policy Committee co-chair, without the constant input from all of our members, from all of you, as well as the support of the National Sector Engagement team, who work closely with the ISCC Secretariat. If you want to learn more about that, there's a panel tomorrow morning, and we'll be talking about the sector perspective. We're building on decades of work led by people like Debbie Douglas from Okazi and Chris Friesen from AMSA, who are in this photo, who were sector co-chairs for many, many years before us. ISCC's 2023 Settlement Outcomes Report said that service providers were able to successfully adjust to the pandemic and related restrictions. That is true, and we know that our sector is incredibly flexible and used to jumping over hurdles, used to doing more with less, but it can't continue like that in perpetuity. Most participants, most of our members report feeling exhausted and overworked. They struggle to maintain a healthy work-life balance during the pandemic and since then, especially with COVID cases on the rise again. We have online fatigue with seemingly endless Zoom meetings, workshops, virtual conferences, and it's great we can all get together, but it seems that it's happening more and more. We're on more and more national committees and more meetings, as well as our key work locally. We've heard that public support is wavering, but the numbers of clients keep on growing, including eligibility for some new clients who can be served but are not reflected in the funding formula. In our region, in the prairies, that caused major problems because our general funding was down on permanent resident landings, but we had all these new people arriving. So some places were laying off staff at the same time as seeing increasing client numbers. And then, of course, the constant stress of turning ineligible clients away, as we heard about questioning the minister this morning. We know they'll probably become permanent residents, and most provinces are sadly not filling the funding gaps. We know that the right services for the right clients at the right time is key, and the right time is when they first land. Otherwise, they will not commit to Canada. Citizenship applications within 10 years of arrival dropped by 40% between 2001 and 2021. And I just read a really sad quote from somebody saying, no matter how much you make, your take-home pay is not even keeping up the expense. After 10 years of hardship, I am now a proud Canadian citizen who doesn't want to live in Canada anymore. We cannot hear these stories. We're all preparing our CFP budgets at the moment and hoping that this is the time that we will be allowed to offer non-precarious, multi-year employment contracts with decent salaries and cost of living increases for our mostly newcomer racialized female staff. Funding is tight. Funding is tight, and we are working together with our IRCC colleagues, and we know Treasury is demanding cuts. But funders and the sector cannot choose when to use the GBA Plus lens to ensure equity for newcomer clients and when to break it with an inequitable, inaccurate, and oversimplified cost per client calculation that punishes agencies who are facing other barriers and especially who want to ensure decent compensation to recruit and retain the best staff, which will guarantee better outcomes for clients. That was my little speech, but back to success stories to inspire us all. 28% of the most recent immigrants to Manitoba settle outside of our CMA, compared to only 8% of all immigrants in the 2021 census. So the small centres in Manitoba are rocking. There are now 2 small centre RAP programs in Manitoba and a francophone welcoming community in La Rivière-Seine. In Winkler, 25.3% of the population were immigrants in the 2021 census, and 6% were recent immigrants, which is higher than in Winnipeg itself. These are all stills taken from some fantastic videos that Regional Connections, the service provider, made. They offer the entire range of services, including RAP, in person in Winkler, Altona, Morden, and Dauphin, and remotely in Churchill, Manitoba. And they have seen an increase of over 80% in IRCC clients from 2017 to 2023, plus all their provincial non-PR clients. And this is in Altona. Altona was selected as a rural northern immigration pilot and is one of the only ones to have mostly overseas applicants. These are just great smiley families. Just showing how small-town Manitoba is changing. And when I go back to the UK and I see how small-town United Kingdom is not changing in any way at all and still looks exactly like when I grew up there, it's very exciting to see what Manitoba is looking like today. Whoops. This is back in Winnipeg at ERCOM, which has a mission to empower newcomer families to integrate into the wider community through affordable transitional housing for up to 3 years and a full range of wraparound on-site programs and services. Sorry, Suresh is just showing me on his laptop. It says slow. I'm obviously speeding up. Indigenous training, such as the Turtle Island exercise, being led here by knowledge keeper Clayton Sandy, is mandatory for all staff at ERCOM. They intentionally work as allies for change to build community with Indigenous groups and enhance their own knowledge and understandings to pass on to their clients. What's more, a quarter of ERCOM staff are former tenants in their accommodation. Oh, here we go. This is ERCOM's greening program, which allows space for families, many of whom who have mobility or other barriers, to plant seeds, including some that they bought from their home countries if they had an agricultural background, allowing them to be successful regardless of language and literacy skills, and to enjoy a healing connection with the earth in their new home. Got 1 more minute, so this is just more. This was an anti-racism campaign during COVID. And that's me. And just say during COVID, we also had a newcomer vaccine awareness working group, which brought together public health officers, settlement agencies, ethnocultural groups to identify vaccine concerns and questions and barriers. And by many interventions, including multilingual resources created by the ethnocultural communities and service providers hosting vaccine clinics, there was a noticeable increase in vaccination rates among BIPOC communities and newcomers. So again, this work is happening in every province and territory, and umbrellas and LIPs, and we couldn't do any of it without the direct service agencies who make the time to sit on endless advisory committees and to be the bridge to the clients. As hard as it seems some days to dismantle those systemic barriers and stretch the resources to meet the needs of all of us, immigrants, new or established, Canadian-born, our Indigenous relatives, the settlement sector, funders and researchers, all of us here today, we're united in our desire to see newcomers thrive alongside everyone else living on Turtle Island. We are resilient, innovative, flexible, and inspired, and we're all working on this together, and the days go a little smoother when we remember that. So, thank you, merci, miigwech.
Thank you, Vicky. As Neelam comes on, there's a ton of busy stuff that's happening here. I thought that I was taller than I am. I can barely see there, so I'm going back and forth. And you have a laptop there that if the speakers are going too fast and it's being translated, it says slow down, and it's like, whoa, a lot comes. So if you're watching us go back and forth, it's because we're trying to focus. So welcome, Neelam.
I guess it's going to stay in my hand. Good morning, everybody. My name is Neelam Sahota, and I'm going to be taking us further west. You've seen, I think there's a trend here, moving from back east over into Manitoba, and I'll be speaking about BC. So again, thank you so much for having me here on this plenary. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Diversity Community Resources Society, and I will be speaking about the implications of increased immigration as it pertains to a city that has already been going through some significant growth crunches as well, and how that has all worked together. So I'll begin with recognizing that our work takes place on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Semiahmoo, Katzie, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kikayet, Musqueam, and Tsawwassen First Nations, which is now known as Surrey. The knowledge and traditions of these communities are significant in providing context to the work we do, and diversity recognizes the importance that reconciliation has in building truly inclusive and strong communities. So Diversity is a registered charity based in Surrey, British Columbia, where we've had a 45-year history as the first settlement service provider in the region in the South Fraser. We're also one of the founding members of our provincial umbrella organization, AMSA. Our philosophy as an organization is to be a social innovator. We strive to work in an ecosystem that partners with the usual partners across all levels of government, across a broad spectrum of departments and ministries that affect the socioeconomic well-being of British Columbians, partners in the settlement sector, of course, but also equally importantly, our ecosystem engages the business community, Indigenous organization partners, and non-settlement partners in the vast landscape of NPOs and cooperatives in our province. This philosophy of our work lends our programs and services to be what I called Settlement Plus, taking traditional concepts of what settlement is as defined by government policies, but using an equity-centered design to identify what gaps are needing to be iterated in our program and design accordingly. We are of the firm belief that the future of a prosperous nation hinges on how we treat people, how we invest in them, and create viable pathways for them to be empowered to make choices that are in their own best interest. As we've heard from my fellow colleagues who preceded me, immigration rates have been increasing over the last several years and are now stabilizing at record high with nearly 500,000 newcomers annually for the next few years. BC and the Lower Mainland remain the top destination, with most of that growth, around 89%, is due to international migration. And in BC, Surrey is the fastest growing city, outpacing the city of Vancouver. So let's take a look at a few of Surrey's specific numbers. Surrey in particular is growing at an unprecedented rate, adding more than 51,000 people since 2016. Expressed in another way, over the last 5 years, Surrey welcomed 28 new residents every single day. At the current rate, the city is on track to become the province's largest city within the next decade, surpassing Vancouver in population. Surrey attracts over 20% of immigrants to British Columbia's southwest coast and also receives 36% of the province's government-assisted refugees, far more than any other municipality in BC. And I will move over to the next slide. And here are some interesting statistics to highlight the demographic profile of who is actually arriving to our city. To start off with, we are a city with a young demographic, hence our city's tagline, "The future lives here." Is drawing upon inspiration from its demographic in age and in growth numbers. The majority of recent arrivals to Surrey are in the 25 to 54-year-old age group, compared to 42% of the total population. Just want to make sure I was on the right slide here. 67% of Surrey's residents are identified as members of a racialized group, so it's a very diverse group that's also arriving. Public infrastructure in the city has not kept up with the growth. It's an understatement in our city. In particular, schools are seeing the effects of the significant growth. This population growth is also affecting other public institutions, such as healthcare access, where we are seeing continued challenges in finding family doctors, for example. Surrey Memorial Hospital is the second largest hospital in BC and has the busiest emergency department. Another area facing the weight of the population growth is housing. Of course, there's no surprise there. Housing affordability concerns in BC, particularly the Lower Mainland, are well reported, with BC having the highest rate of unaffordable housing nationally at 25.5%, a statistics that most British Columbians are not proud of. Now, couple that with the incredible growth Surrey is undergoing, and we have some very serious challenges ahead. The shortage has been several years in the making, with housing starts only being 45% of what the population growth is. And these numbers do not include tens of thousands of international students and temporary foreign workers who are also vying for the same limited housing stock. Once seen as an affordable option to Vancouver, Surrey's housing market, and especially the rental market, is in crisis, with vacancy rates plummeting to near 1%, while rents have skyrocketed 65% over the past 5 years. Overall, from an economic standpoint, there is positive news regarding BC's economic growth holding steady and immigrants' participation in the labor market. However, an unacceptably high number of newcomers face chronic underemployment due to Canada's policies of lack of foreign credential recognition and systemic barriers to the labor market. We were pleased, however, that just last month, British Columbia finally announced new legislation and funding to support internationally trained professionals to get their credentials recognized faster in BC. In addition, a new Pay Transparency Act came into effect as of this month in BC, which is also a positive step towards creating more employment equity. Our approach in our services is done through a lens of social justice and innovation, as these are both necessary and crucial to one another. You cannot achieve social justice without thinking and operating innovatively. Jeff Bezos, which I think most of you know, the founder of Amazon, an icon that revolutionized e-commerce, quoted, "I think frugality drives innovation, just like other constraints do. One of the only best ways to get out of a tight box is to invent your way out." Simply put, our immigration strategy and the alignment of funding will never be equal. I think this is a sad reality. Government funding with competing areas of budgetary constraints across departments and possible future austerity measures will always create the funding is not enough situation that all of us service providers feel. Then if you add in a layer of working in a city that has had exponential growth in a relatively short period of time with critical infrastructure that is at least 2 decades behind, you really do feel the constraints, and I think some of that is the burnout that my colleague Vicky was also alluding to. That's also the frugality part of the quote I was referring to and trying to draw that inference. When most people think about innovation, they usually think of technology. Innovation actually starts with people. It's a mindset that is looking to achieve outcomes and working backwards to figure out how to close that gap. Service providers like ours are most often mission-driven, values-based organizations working with incredibly challenging restrictions of short-term funding with very limited opportunities to build capacity for core functions, which include the ability to incubate and pilot ideas that spur innovation. Working our way out of this tight box is to envision the future of service providers, to possibly look beyond government horizons, to actively lean into the challenges ahead. Developing innovative, differentiating approaches and services means that we are looking beyond just diversifying revenue sources, but also looking at who else needs to do this, who else do we need to reach, and what else do they require. This reframing of our mindset enables us to move away from a charitable framework alone to one of social innovation. It's individuals that we serve that guide the innovation embedded in our approaches. We develop innovative programming that meets newcomers where they are at and empowers and helps them reach for the goals that they want. Reciprocity is a core value of our organization, meaning we view our role and the individuals within it and those we serve as having inherent assets rather than focusing solely on needs. It need not be an equal balancing of the two, but recognition of assets is intentional in our work. Case management has been a center point of service quality for us. With some of the statistics that I have shared earlier about the demographics we work with, we especially have honed our skills on an individualized, tailored approach, especially for those individuals where a group or lower touch point environment does not make sense to achieve the necessary outcomes. This allows us to have both breadth, but most importantly, depth of services that meets people where they are at. Our staff understand service delivery not only through a gender-based analysis lens, but an even more comprehensive intersectionality lens. We have made a concerted effort to develop capacity within our organization to offer services beyond just traditional settlement. For example, in addition to our settlement services, we have integrated counseling and mental health supports and culturally informed gender-based violence counseling, as well as a myriad of community engagement programs that help newcomers become equipped to learn, equipped to take in the services. So this is just a quick example of some of the non-settlement work that we do that we think is incredibly important, which is are some of our community gardens and the social connections that are made during those activities. So at the core of our ability to create differentiating approaches is getting access to data and leveraging data-driven insights so we can continuously improve and evolve services. As we listen and document, we pause to assess if our services and staffing suffice, and we make sure that we make that course correction there. I'm also going to be speeding up because there is one video I'd like to play as well too. So our innovative approaches isn't just about service provision, but about capacity building within our teams, ensuring that our frontline staff are equipped to handle the unique challenges that recipients face. So when it comes to funding innovative ideas and approaches to immigrant settlement, we've been compelled to be creative in our revenue generation models. We not only have created social enterprises to help us supplement our primary government funding that may not always be flexible enough to try new things and pilot new ideas. This supports the organization and its impact by putting its profits back into charitable work we do. This allows for flexible funding to develop differentiating responsive programming that may not yet be met by traditional funding streams. It also allows us providing opportunities for employment to many newcomers, which is an obstacle faced by so many newcomers still having to enter into the labor market. And finally, social enterprises also become our incubators of testing different modalities of service provision that can later be scaled to funded programs based on the efficacy of these modalities that we now have data on. And I'm trying to sort of make sure that I sort of lean into that beyond social enterprises. We also engage with our business community as well. I have a video that I'd like to play that just provides a little bit of an introduction on the partnership that we have with Coast Capital Savings, which is a credit union for credentialing women who have come in as skilled immigrants. And so if we can get the video on the screen, that would be great.
Imagine studying all your life to become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. You move your family halfway across the world to a new country, and then you lose your profession because your qualifications are no longer recognized. So you settle on a job that you're overqualified for. And what's even worse, if you're a woman, you tend to get paid less than a man. This is what Diversity and Coast are partnering together to solve.
What was really different about this program for women was that this was one program that met them where they are at. They were not told to rewrite their narrative. They were not told to change their career trajectory or pivot to another career. You are a nurse? Let's get you on track to become a nurse.
I'm a pediatric dentist by profession. My highest level would be a master's in pediatric and preventive dentistry, after which I served as a lecturer in a government college, moving from a place where you were all good to do, and then you move to another country. It becomes quite challenging in the day-to-day life, adapting to the new customs.
It's a huge life change to move to another country. Diversity has been working in this community for over 45 years, and so we know the community. We work with women who have come from other countries to grow their income by helping get them into a job that's more aligned with the job that they were in their home country and the education that they have. But also we can help connect them to a community.
The immigrant wage gap, if it is bridged, can boost the economy up to $150 billion in 2026. So it's not just a right thing for Canada to do, it's a smart thing for Canada to do.
I see myself in the next 5 years having my own dental office, having the potential to go back to my home country or be there with my family and not having any constraints on the income aspect of life. I have taken my daughter to dental offices and she knows I am a dentist. I want her to see me going back into my profession. I believe she will be proud of it.
A very heartfelt and sincere thank you to all the Coast Capital members for the support that you've given to this grant and for the way this has impacted so many lives in the community. Thank you.
For those of
Thank you. That's just a short snippet, one of many, many programs that we have that are similarly along the lines of reaching out to clients that are otherwise ineligible under government funding. And it's really a bit of a jigsaw puzzle approach that we're really using around really leveraging all of society and all, working in a larger ecosystem. So in recognition of time, I'm just going to wrap up here. Social innovation thrives on collaboration. It's on doing things with others rather than just to them or for them, and that is a really strong ethos that we lead with. And I think I will wrap up here in the interest of time, and I believe we'll be taking some questions from the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil. So you have access to just Slido. I've seen the questions as they're coming up, so please go there. In the meantime, there will be another short video. The sponsor of this particular session is Pre-Arrival Canada for the YMCA of Greater Toronto. So let's just look at the video first, and then I'll start asking the questions. Soon. Cue.
There are so many questions before moving and immigrating to Canada.
how do I find employment information? What career opportunities are in demand?
Housing, childcare, education, employment, these are also important to your life. You must find the answer before you immigrate to Canada.
Prearrivalcanada.ca can help you find the answers before you immigrate to Canada. Prearrivalcanada.ca offers multiple free programs with just one easy registration. These pre-arrival programs offer free information
to help with living and working in Canada by registering for settlement and employment programs,
and help with getting your education and work experience recognized in Canada.
To connect with employers and mentors before arriving in Canada.
If you've been approved to receive free pre-arrival services, visit prearrivalcanada.ca to see which programs may be right for you. Prearrivalcanada.ca and all programs available are funded by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada.
Excellent, thank you. So what I'm now going to do is basically just as a reminder, because we had some pretty intense presentations, just summarize in about 20 seconds what each one of the panel members said, and then go right into the questions, because one of the questions has, at this point, 37 responses, a very significant question. So Keith started really in terms of polling and what Canadians are saying. And what Canadians are saying is slow down the number of immigrants so we can deal with the pressures we currently have at home. But what they're also saying is that immigrants contribute in different ways. And people who are at the local level basically acknowledge and recognize this on an ongoing basis. You then had Christine, who basically talked about how IRCC has leveraged data in terms of who's coming and providing responsive funding and programming, including the most recent proposal that has gone out. So trying to be pretty innovative and being collaborative in terms of what's happening based on what the minister discussed this morning. Vicky then talked about innovation, and she talked about innovation from the perspective of working with 62 different organizations and not competing, but actually working together. She talked about, and she might not realize this, the 4 C's, and I missed one of the C's, so she's going to help me in a minute. Collaboration, communication, capacity building, and I didn't write down the 4th C quickly, so Vicky, maybe you can help me here. And then Neelam talked about the example in BC and innovation, and it finished off with a really excellent video that talks about, in my mind, a human-centric approach, but what it really talks about is don't do it to us, work with us, ask us what is required, so that we can work together in collaboration with those who are impacted. So that's just a high-level summary of what you heard from the presenters. And I will start now with a pretty broad question, is how can we collectively counter the narrative that immigration is causing, and I'll broaden it, all kinds of issues, cost of living, housing crisis, etc., and that we need clear and compelling arguments that go beyond highlighting the need for newcomer labor in construction. Again, I'll add a few more things here. This question is really about not using immigrants and newcomers as commodities coming here to fill the labor market. It's here to contribute, to make our country richer. And basically, we want to also retain people, because there is a question here, which I can't read, but it talks about, we don't really talk about retention of immigrants. And what I didn't talk about initially is that there is a report that was released by the Institute of Canadian Citizenship. If you have not seen it, you should take a look at it. It's called The Leaky Bucket. And basically what this research study shows is that immigrants aren't necessarily staying, especially young immigrants. They're saying that we will leave within 2 years. So, this isn't just basically a country where people are coming, which is what the assumption is. The narrative is changing. We want immigrants, we need to make it easier. So I am going to turn it over to, who wants to go with this question first?
Sure, there's a lot of questions there. But the narrative about immigration causing housing and other issues, they are part of it in a way, but it's clearly not the main factor. And perhaps I think, how do we counter this? I think maybe at the local level, not just the national level, but to whoever is in a position to do the analysis, the documentation of exactly what's happening with housing, and perhaps this would need to be at a local level, to identify the clear factors that may be taking place, there are probably a number of them, and then find a way to communicate that broadly in terms of what are the different issues that are affecting relevant communities like Surrey, and to get that out there and effectively communicate. And I will mention that Daniel Bernard, who is the head of the Institute on Canadian Citizenship, actually published a very effective op-ed in the Globe and Mail some weeks ago, who basically took this issue on and said it's not primarily newcomers, and identified very clearly a number of other factors that are taking place. others may want to add.
Anybody?
What's the button? It's a race to the button. Oh, they're on. Okay. Did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mentioned that we do a lot of combined advocacy. We all know this is not an immigration issue, it's a housing issue, and it's an affordable housing issue. If housing was suddenly free, everybody would be able to find somewhere to live. We can't find enough housing that's within people's budgets, especially people who are on very tight and fixed budgets. So I think continuing to advocate with all of our housing partners is important, and to keep on reminding people that housing for 20, 30, 40 years has been exclusively built for profit, to make more money for people who already have homes and not to house new people or anybody already living here. So I think we just need to keep on keeping the debate on housing being affordable.
I guess I could add from my perspective, and thanks Keith for the points about data. Really, I think that's what it comes down to, understanding, what's at issue there. And you make a good point about housing. As it relates to countering the narrative, I mean, as we understand, and this is fantastic, that we know we've been able to tease it out at least to one level exactly what is at issue, so that helps a lot. So knowing that, what the sentiment is and what the problem is, at least from my perspective at IRCC, it's the successful settlement and integration of newcomers that is going to help address any public sentiment slippage, right? And so that's why we're really trying to use this next call for proposal. It's actually excellent timing given the downturn in the trend that you've highlighted, to take stock of this and set ourselves up to make sure that we're supporting newcomers so that they can successfully integrate. And that's not just about getting into the labor market, but obviously that's a big part of it, right? I mean, that's key to them being established and being able to contribute in other ways, but not just economically, socially as well. So at IRCC, we're really focused on that piece of the puzzle. Thanks.
If I can just add as well too, I do think, previous to diversity, my career has actually been 10 years with our provincial government's housing commission, so know a little thing or two about our affordable housing policies, and I really do think this is it's actually there's no correlation. There's very little correlation between the immigration and the housing sector. I think what's gotten us into this predicament is that we've worked in silos. Government has worked in silos. So there's been always this segregation of immigration and a segregation of housing in each of the other departments, when actually it's really, really correlated. And that's why I keep using the word socioeconomic challenges. And I think we need to start creating that sort of rhetoric and language when we're talking about housing, because socioeconomic means what are the things that are important for individuals when they're coming here. So safety and security and affordability of housing, access to health care, all of those things are the reasons that we need to really focus on a more really broad definition of what settlement is. It's not settlement as in what is defined by IRCC, but what is actually going to make Canada a livable country, a country that people want to stay in. And so I think this has been a crisis that's been in the making, because quite frankly, we, government and the general public, have been working in silos, and we need to leave and abandon that approach and take a much more integrated approach, because housing is not like widgets. If you find yourself that you're in a backlog with our supply chain issues and the fact that a lot of our red tape actually exists at the municipal level, it takes a good 2 to 3 years at warp speed to get housing out the door. And so this is a crisis that's really been made in the making for the past 2 decades, actually.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Everybody can see the questions, and rather me reading the full question, I'm going to ask panel members, and not all of you. That's a heavy question. So I'm happy to anybody who wants to take this up. The question when Jeff Bezos says, that's a heavy question. Anybody wants to think about it? A lot of people are asking the same question. It's more of a comment. Yes. Okay, we'll wait as you.
Yeah.
Do you want to
I can take this on since I quoted him. So what I meant when I'm elaborating how frugality leads to social innovation and settlement, frugality meaning referring to limited government funding. And the fact of the matter is we have individuals in Canada. We're not just talking about folks that are going to be arriving in this year, maybe even have arrived in the 12 months prior. But we are, as we all know, no surprise, turning into more restrictive economic times, and we need to look at how else are we able to approach settlement. And so the frugality piece is the reference to the fact that there's limited government funding. And so the innovation piece that I'm speaking to it is most organizations, and I think this is maybe a generalization, but quite probably true, is that most of us do have a large contingent of our funding sources from government. Yet, at the same token, we very much so are not government entities. We are working in partnership with government, and so this is really in many ways a bit of a call to action for settlement service providers to be looking beyond the horizons of what government can provide, but making sure that we're working in other industries and with other partners that should be equally invested in the socioeconomic thriving of individuals that are in Canada here today. I provided an example of some financial institutions, but there are other cooperatives and there are other entities out there that I think we need as a sector to be better involving in. And that, again, I go back into my earlier point, is I do think is a reflection of us working in silo. We tend to think we're a settlement sector. And if we look at out in mainstream, and you use that language, someone who is not actually involved in immigration, a lot of them will not know what settlement is. So in many ways, we have created this very elusive sector that mainstream Canadians have a hard time seeing themselves playing into. And I think we need to deconstruct that in order for us to advance moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Neelam. If I may, I would like to just add to this conversation. I mean, today we have mostly people from the settlement sector. I've been to about 2 or 3 conferences in the last few weeks, just regulators, just employers, and then a think tank forum in Charlottetown. And always the conversations are vertical in nature. And I think that this particular conversation takes leadership, and it could be a few people from this group, the federal government, the provincial government, to bring all the voices together, including immigrants and those who are being impacted, to have a conversation to take the country forward. So that's basically my comment on the question. Christine, could you take the next 2 questions? Because they're related to CFP. So what factors determine the closing date for CFP 2024? Did the timing include this conference and winter holidays? And then what is being done by our federal government to help educate the public on the need for immigration in our country?
Sure, thanks. Yes, in terms of the timing for CFP, so it launched on November 14th and will run to the end of January. That's nearly 11 weeks, and as I understand it, that's relatively long for a call of this magnitude, and that was done intentionally. And yes, we were very aware of this conference and the holiday period as well. We are, while applications are being put together, we are not just sitting around waiting for them. There's a pile of work that's being done to be prepared to receive those and properly assess them. So we are also keenly aware of our own holidays and the stress that this timing places on us, but that is why we did extend to nearly 11 weeks. And we also made sure that we had the supports in place to make this feasible. So, for example, the funding guidelines, which are available on the website, are very elaborated, and they provide examples of the types of proposals that would meet, the particular call, depending on which aspect you're looking to apply for. They're meant to be very instructive, and also we've improved how you can, move around and navigate. So it's just meant to be easier. But in addition to that, we have lined up, I think it's more than 30 webinars, and these are an opportunity for applicants to show up and be walked through different aspects of the call. So there are some for just the general, you're a new potential applicant, and so you want to learn about it. And then there are other webinars that are more specific to different streams, different aspects of the call, and that's designed so that it can really help you expedite putting together your proposal. You can ask questions, and there will also be webinars that are just Q&A sessions. We also have a help desk and various other resources online so that we can support you all in your application over the nearly 11-week period.
Thanks, Christine. Keith, there are a couple of questions here for you. The first is, how many individuals participated in the survey and what were the demographic and geographical selection criteria? I'm just going to take one more. When you say people who participate in the research might not be anti-immigration, I'm prompted to ask, what was your sample size and main inclusion criteria for the research? So,
Thank you. Those are good questions. I might have provided more detail about the research, but I had limited minutes, and I wanted to talk about the main findings. Let me address the first question first. I did not intend to convey the idea that there is not anti-immigrant sentiment in Canada. There always has been. So that's clearly the case. And I think the point I was trying to emphasize is that those negative opinions have not expanded or arisen over the past year. Many of these issues, there's no consensus on any one of the survey questions. I think that there are differing opinions, different sentiments, but we're focusing on the trends and what's changed and what has not changed. And the perceptions about immigrants themselves have been fairly stable over the past year. So that's the point I wanted to make. In terms of the research, the first thing I'll say is there's a detailed report on our website at environicsinstitute.org, and I would welcome you to go look at all the details. But roughly speaking, this was a public opinion survey conducted with a representative sample of about 2,000 Canadians 18 and over across the country, accepting the territories in this case. And we take great pains to make sure that our sample includes people across regions, gender, education level, age group, and so forth. So it's not a perfect sample, but it is a representative sample in many respects, and the information on our website breaks the results down by a lot of these different groups. So if you're interested in knowing how the results compare across regions or age groups, or whether people are first, second, or third plus generation, all of that detail is shared in public, and I welcome you to go see it.
Great, thank you. We have about a minute left, and there are lots of questions here, so I am going to suggest that you get in touch with the speakers over lunch. But what I want to do is end by asking each speaker here a question. We have a lot of people here from different provinces, different perspectives, different positions. And as they leave the conference tomorrow, or for those who are going to stay here until Thursday, what is the word of advice that you would give to individuals here so we can take the narrative forward in a positive way? So I'll start with Neelam, since you went last. So Neelam, from your perspective, and then to Keith.
One piece of advice, and that's hard. I would say for settlement service organizations, especially to envision yourselves to be more than just administrators of government contracts, is to look beyond horizons and to be able to see, to be able to do the work right, to be able to do the work with intention and from an equity lens, and to envision yourself to have the opportunity to be able to have dialogues of really reaching across the aisle, perhaps with individuals and organizations that you haven't worked with before, and really try to incorporate that into your business model and your planning. I think that is really one of the very few ways that we'll be able to climb out of this chicken and egg sort of situation of being able to have decent work in this sector, is to reduce our reliance from government in a way that's healthy and allows us to be able to also serve community in a much more holistic way. Thank you.
Thanks, Neelam. Vicky?
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar. Don't get stuck struggling alone. Don't get stuck competing with others for funding. Some of the ones I couldn't include today were just agencies. We had one, Mosaic, which is training up their clients to become childhood educators, and then they provide CNC services at another agency that doesn't have capacity to run that. And that comes out of frugality, but it's a win-win because they're providing employment and they're able to offer services to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to attend. So use your umbrellas, use other methods of getting together, and involve your frontline staff. So they're part of one of Canada's largest national collaborations, and make them feel that way rather than just that they have 19 clients today and only time to see 10 of them. So thank you.
Thank you. Christine?
Thanks. The success that I highlighted, not to diminish, obviously, the challenges and gaps, but the successes are due to such excellent collaboration across many partners, and this needs to continue. We do see opportunities for that to improve, and I would just emphasize on cooperation and bringing in new partners to address the gaps that we're not serving. So from my perspective at this point in time, my advice would be check out the call for proposal because we want to work with you. We want to find a way to address the gaps that we've seen through our data and evidence. So please reach out. There are people on the other end of the line to answer your questions and help you through. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you. So the research that I presented is really at the 30,000-foot level. It's sort of the national picture. And what I talked about today may not apply exactly in your particular community. And I think really the advice is there's no one story when it comes to public sentiment or public opinion. We can't boil everything down to an average Canadian or an average person in a community. There are different perspectives, positive and negative. There are different levels of intensity. So it's really a little more complicated than simply sort of a bit of a simplified narrative I gave you today. And I think the advice would be do what you can to listen to as many people as you can where you're working. And avoid jumping to the conclusion that the loudest voices are the ones that stand for everybody that isn't speaking quite as loudly. So with that, thank you.
Thank you. And so I just want to take the opportunity to thank my colleagues for being authentic, for sharing their experiences. I thank the organizers for inviting me to chair the panel. And I leave you with, in terms of the context that we have set this morning over the next 2 days, is that each and everyone here has agency to make a difference. It isn't just about government, it's about all of us working together. And I challenge you to go out and just think about the workshops and then make a difference in your organizations. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a good 2 days.
Well done. Well run. Thank you.